Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa College. Welcome to Culture by Neurodesign. Now today I'll discuss step 3 of my signature program, Neuro-Inspired 12 Steps to a Future-Proof Workplace Culture. You'll still be able to follow this episode if you haven't listened to those where I talk about steps 1 and 2. But if you'd like to learn more, then please listen to episode 18, where I introduce the program and talk about step 1, and episode 22, where I discuss, yeah, you've guessed it, step 2. But I'll give you a quick recap here. So in step 1, I talked about 3 interconnected problems that are common in our teams today: engagement and wellness, talent, retention and acquisition, and innovation and resilience. And I covered the 2-part solution that will ensure that your team is innovative and makes people want to engage and desperate to start and stay working there. So part 1 is that you need cognitive diversity. That's people with different thinking styles, such as either having loads of ideas or preferring structure. Now, people with these styles will tend to clash if you just leave them to it. And that brings us to part two of the solution, which is developing the capability of cognitive inclusion, which is building the connections between team members. So we talked about neurodivergences as being the extremes of cognitive diversity, and also of offering us a model of how to build cognitive inclusion in our teams. So that was step 1. Step 2 was about slowing down for a moment so that we're able to go more quickly and effectively later. It's about defining a vision for your team and the metrics to motivate yourself when you see how much you're progressing. So that later, when we start to take action, is step 3. We're going to start with you. As the team lead, you set the tone, you set the example. Your team will mirror your behavior, especially when they experience a difference that your small changes will make for them. They'll want to copy you. So we're going to be pulling in your team in the next step, step 4, but for now we'll stay just thinking about you. So this step is about starting to make some small changes in your interactions with your team members. It's not adding extra work, don't worry, because you'd have those interactions anyway. It's just about changing things a little within your existing role. And you don't need to know everything to make a difference. You already know enough to start. And you don't even need a big budget. Nothing we're doing here costs anything more than your commitment. And when you sign up for the 12 Steps program, you'll receive a free PDF download every 4 weeks about that step. And in between, I'll also send you some optional extra resources related to that step. So those PDF downloads contain more information and, importantly, all of the practical support that you'll need to put this in place for your team. In this podcast, I'll just give you a taste of what's in step 3. Okay, this is not sufficient on its own. Okay, small changes. So in this step, we're going to focus on 2 types of small behavioral changes. First of all, microinclusions. Second, what, not how. Let's talk about the impact of each of these. First of all, microinclusions. It's really just a fancy term for small acts of kindness. Right? I think it's a good term to use because you can immediately see that they're the opposite of microaggressions. And microaggressions are little subtle behaviors or comments or actions, apparently even factors in the environment, that convey a negative message towards a group that's underrepresented. So they aren't always intentional, but whether they are intentional or not, their impact accumulates, and it can cause, at best, disengagement. Oh, only disengagement. Oh, wonderful. Or more often, over time, they'll cause mental health issues such as anxiety and stress and eventually burnout. So for example, saying you don't seem autistic undermines the experience and bravery of someone who's just told you that they're autistic. That's a microaggression. Another example is that your inputs into a meeting are constantly ignored. So it seems logical that micro-inclusions would boost engagement, self-confidence, mental health, right? And that's exactly what a research study with technology employees in Silicon Valley found. Almost 900 Silicon Valley employees listened to descriptions of 3 types of work groups, and then they rated their sense of belonging and fit to these imaginary work groups. So group 1 was a control group, and in the description, no interactions were described at all. In group 2, descriptions of microaggressive behavior were included. So what was described was that the manager interrupts or dismisses ideas and then later on shares them as their own, as a microaggression. And in group 3, descriptions of micro-inclusive behavior were included. So in this case, the fantasy manager was asking for input and acknowledging ideas and providing support. And what were the results? So it probably won't surprise you that in group 2, that's the microaggressions group, the belonging and fit ratings of this imaginary group were lower than in the control group. And in group 3, the micro-inclusion group, men's belonging and fit increased by 23% and women's by 35%. Amazing, I think. Now, in another study group, the researchers saw a 4-fold increase in belonging and fit. And then they also measured commitment and self-confidence. And commitment jumped 37%. Self-confidence rose 27%. So there you go. Engagement and improved mental health. And this is only imagining being in a team with micro-inclusive behaviors. Now think about reality, the cumulative impact of this positive feelings and positive experiences day after day after day. Think about the potential gains for your team. So now I know, right, when somebody asks me, what do you think, Lisa? It makes me feel great. My opinion is important. Someone wants to know what I think. And you can bet that I put in all of my effort to share a great opinion. It's well informed and clearly articulated. So that simple question makes me feel happy. And I really strive to contribute my best. So if that's what you want people to do in your team, then keep listening. Another example, let's say you made a mistake, right? And instead of someone getting angry and asking how it could possibly have happened, they ask you how you're planning to fix it. That's an incredible feeling. You know you've messed up and you feel awful about that, but you're still being asked to contribute. Your opinion is still valued. You've got a chance to correct your mistake and learn from it. It's wonderful. Now consider someone who is vulnerable and has probably experienced microaggressions throughout their whole lives. A comment like, I'm surprised how good you are at organising projects like this. Someone who just bravely shared their ADHD diagnosis with their team maybe meant well, but it's experienced as a microaggression. So this is the first small behavioural change you're going to focus on, microinclusions. In the 12-step resource material, I'll provide more context so we can make sure that your microinclusions, your small act of kindness, are relevant to your vision. But now in this podcast, I want to move on to talk about the second small behavioural change that you're going to focus on, which is what, not how. So maybe you're thinking, what do you mean by this, Lisa? Well, quite often as leaders, we can focus too much on how tasks have been performed rather than on what outcome was achieved. And this is really especially a trap for leaders who used to do one of the jobs that's now part of the team that they're leading. So it's their comfort zone, they know what they're talking about. Perhaps they also like the work and they miss it a bit. And they often think that their way is the best of all possible ways that something in that job can be done. Well, it is the best for that leader. It fits their style, it fits their skills, it fits their experience, but that does not make it the best for everyone. Let's think of a couple of examples. The leader might be an extrovert, right? But their communication style is not the best for an introvert, as we heard from Richard Etienne, who discussed this with me in episode 20. Another example is that the desire to seek out new things associated with people with traits of ADHD, which I described in episode 17, that isn't the best for an autistic person, like the structured, more cautious, highly accurate style of Michelle Dawson, who's an autistic lab assistant that I talked about in episode 15. So this focus on how is a common way of leaders undermining the contributions of team members whose cognitive styles, thinking styles, ways of working is different from theirs. They may not understand the cognitive style. Now, the undermining is often unintentional, but the effect is the same. Okay, it's extremely rare, if you think about it, that how something is done makes a difference to the outcome. It makes a difference to the person working on the outcome, but it doesn't really make a difference to what the outcome is. So let me share an example from my personal life, right? When I do a jigsaw puzzle, I always start by completing the edges. I always make the frame first, and then I put together sections of the picture in the middle, and eventually those sections join together, and eventually the jigsaw's finished. Now, my autistic son, he works on a jigsaw character by character. He doesn't care about the edge. So he'll search for a particular piece to complete the dog Chase, the Chase character from Paw Patrol or whoever it is, before moving on to the Sky character. So it's a really uncomfortable approach to me, how he's doing it. But he finishes the jigsaw. The what, the how doesn't matter. My son doesn't want to use my way of doing a jigsaw. I don't want to use his way either, but we can both complete a jigsaw. So if we focus on the what, the jigsaw, and not the how, the edges or the character by character, it doesn't really matter. So if we adopt an outcome-focused approach, focus on what, then we focus on the value and the results of the contributions instead of putting too much emphasis on methods that are related to personal styles. And this is a really, really good way, inspired by neurodivergence, to build connections and trust with all of your team members, whether they are neurodivergent or neurotypical. In addition, you're enabling their different strengths and perspectives, right? And this is key to having a productive innovation cycle. If you're going to force a one-size-fits-all in your teams in terms of how things get done, if you try to force people to conform to one way of doing some things, then you're going to suffocate all the different strengths that are trying to come out in your team and trying to give you value. Different thinkers approach problems in ways that you might find unconventional. You might find them odd, like I do with my son and his jigsaw technique. But being able to do this one thing their way will make people enjoy working in your team, not spend time looking for other jobs, and it will also make your team great at solving problems. Now, I'm definitely not saying that it's easy to release control over how work's done and to trust people whose styles you might not understand to do the work, but it's worth it. So as well as the micro-inclusions, your action this step will be to be curious about the different working styles in your team. And this will be the way to give you the confidence to step back a bit and let your team get on with it, regardless of whether you are someone who now exerts a bit or a lot of control over how. So you're going to be curious about different styles in your team, not to correct them, but to learn from them. And we need to be really careful about how we phrase your questions here, because something like, I haven't ever used that approach, why do you use it, could imply an error in how somebody is working and cause them to justify their difference from you instead of explaining their preference for that approach. It would be experienced as a microaggression, quite likely. But asking instead, I'm curious about your approach. What's something about it that really works for you? Is not threatening. It's open. It's interested. It's a micro-inclusion. It would make someone feel seen and valued, and you will be able to build up your confidence that there is a reason for this different way of working. So one last action that you'll do in this step is to capture how you feel before and after you've made your micro-inclusive comments and asked your curious, control, releasing, what, not, how questions, and to capture how your team member responded. Did you feel nervous about doing it? Did you feel silly? Are you curious to see what the impact will be? Are you skeptical that there will be any impact at all? It's all fine, right? Be honest with yourself. But afterwards, I bet you'll feel happy that you spent the 1 or 2 minutes to do this. And you might even feel proud of yourself for starting to change your behavior. Maybe you feel rewarded by the response of your team member. Happy. Perhaps you'll smile. And imagine what you feeling like that is worth to your team as well. Now, let me run through your action options for step 3. I always offer multiple action options for each step. So if you want to do it your way, you're going to practice micro-inclusion. You're going to practice building your trust in the different hows, the different ways of doing things in your team. I'll give you 2 ground rules to help you with this as well. And you'll also capture how you feel before and after and what your team members' responses were. So with the PDF download that you'd receive for step 3, you'd be able to do all of this yourself if that's how you prefer. Your second option is the Co-Navigator. So the Co-Navigator for this step is a free PDF download with more examples and more guidance to make them relevant to the observations you made for step 1 and to the vision you created in step 2. It's free, but you do need to email me to ask for it when you get to this step. Third option is the smart investment. And for this step, it's for people who are struggling to get started because you're scared of making a mistake. And it's a real fear and it's a real obstacle to getting started. I felt it, and I often feel it now when I'm trying out a new behavior for the first time with my autistic son, and I'm hoping that the outcome will be positive. I've come across it so many times in team leads who really want to be more inclusive of the neurodivergent people in their team, but they're scared of making a mistake. So if this is you, I'll help you to get unstuck with this smart investment, which is a 1-hour call with me. And finally, the Future Ready Accelerator. So we're in the foundational block now of the 12 steps, and the foundational accelerator relates to steps 2, 3, and 4. So I've just talked about the smart investment for this step, which is €250. Now, if you've made the smart investment as well for step 2, and you do it now for step 3, and you will also do it for step 4, that will cost you €795. But with the accelerator, you get them all together for a 20% discount, so just €636. And you have the option to progress through them more quickly than waiting for 4 weeks for each new step to arrive in your inbox. And you'll also have the option for an extra 10% discount on the operational accelerator, which is for steps 5, 6, 7, and 8. So in other words, 30% discount there. If you want to learn more about this 12-step program, listen to episode 18, where I introduced it, and episode 22, where I describe creating your vision and your benchmark. There's also information on the sign-up page of my website, which is really easy to find, and the link is in the notes for this episode. So I think that this, step 3, is a really exciting step, right? You've taken some time to acquire knowledge about what we're doing in step 1. You've built a great vision about what you want to achieve for your team in step 2, and now is the time where you start to get closer to your vision in ways that aren't extra work. Right? You integrate it into the regular interactions that you already have with your team. But these small changes are very impactful. You'll be making a difference only 9 weeks after signing up for this program. Good for you. Thanks for listening.